What's the difference between a Muslim and an Islamist?
An Islamist is somebody that's looking to have Islam have a political role. So somebody that wants the government to follow Sharia law, for example, or that wants to change the way people interact with the state, or it's largely a political movement versus a religious movement.
You think Islam is political more than religious?
I wouldn't say more, but one of the differences between Christianity and Islam is that with Christianity, the state was completely separate. It was the Roman Empire. With Islam, Muhammad established his own state and conquered surrounding areas. So it was always the political and religious power were intermeshed.
Is ISIS, you think, about the religion of Islam, or do you think ISIS is about something else?
It's a bit of both, in the sense that there's a power vacuum and they're filling up that power vacuum. There was an issue with Shia and Sunnis where Shias were in power and Sunnis were not, and they were able to exploit that vacuum. But what they're doing, the way they're governing, is very, very Islamic. If you read early Islamic texts, that's exactly the way their governments were formed and did operate. There are a few discrepancies here and there, but for the vast majority, it is following Islamic scripture.
The charge is being tossed out and about that it is our fault that ISIS exists. Certainly we have some culpability.
Yeah, definitely.
How are we culpable?
In the sense of the instability in that area, it depends on how you define culpability, how you define geopolitics and backlash. So if Saddam had existed, for example, till today, then probably the Iraqi state would be stronger. There wouldn't be enough of a space for any revolutionary force, religious or irreligious. They exploited that space and we created it. The issue is generally if you're going to destabilize any state, is there any power that can take over? And we were responsible for destabilizing the state that existed in that area. The issue is that state was horrible and murderous and genocidal. So that's a whole different question, that should we or shouldn't we have destabilized it. I was against the Iraq War personally. But once you destabilize any regime, any form of government anywhere, people will try to exploit that. To that extent, we're culpable that we created the situation. But ISIS itself, I don't see how America is responsible for that.
Can you tell me, in your opinion, what drives the brutality of ISIS? This isn't just we want to be the religion of planet Earth. This is we want to lock people in cages and douse them in fuel and burn them alive and behead them on international television. And can you speak to what drives that, you think?
I can speak to it, but I don't know how accurate that would be.
Just a personal take on it.
Yeah, so the issue generally is that if you look at theocracies, if you look at 7th century ideologies or 1st century, or even before that, if you read the Old Testament, if you read the Quran, they are violent texts because they reflected an era where violence was normal. Muhammad conquered areas and enslaved women. He had his own sex slaves. Other people did that too. The same existed within the Old Testament, where Moses commanded that kill every woman except for young virginal women and keep them for yourself. So that was largely the tapestry within where all these religions were born. And this is more of a revivalist idea where they want to recreate that environment, where they believe that environment was the best environment ever. And since it's perfection, they want to go back to it.
Does ISIS attract a certain ilk of people? Is there the disenfranchised, those who have been maybe cast off by their own families and cultures, looking to belong? I mean, they're recruiting all over the world, yeah. Right?
So not necessarily, I think. To a certain extent, yes. But there are a lot of people that are looking for something to belong to. That are looking to, say, be part of a revolutionary force that will change the world. And for a lot of Muslims, it resonates because they are identifying with early Islam. And the issue is a lot of texts that are being put out there by religious sources. If you look at Saudi Arabia, the version of Islam they practice is a very austere Islam, Wahhabism, and in which they advocate going back to exactly what Muhammad did. And so people that subscribe to that, they will see this as being fulfillment of prophecy. If you look at Saudi Arabia itself, 200 years ago when that whole movement started, they were very similar to ISIS. The early Abdul Wahhab that started Wahhabism, he conquered neighboring areas, he desecrated religious sites. He was very, very brutal, to the point where the Ottoman Empire intervened and actually killed him. ISIS is simply an extension of the same tradition.
ISIS then is nothing new.
In my opinion, no, it's not.
What's the ISIS solution? What do we do? How do we fix it?
That's a much longer issue, in the sense that we need to, if you look at most Muslims idolize early Islam. They view it as whatever Muhammad did was perfect, but nobody actually sits down and analyzes what the consequences of doing certain actions are. So Muhammad established a theocracy, therefore theocracies are good. But if you examine the history of humanity, regardless of religion, Christian theocracies, Hindu theocracies, Muslim theocracies always end badly, because you already have all the truth. The dogma defines what should be done. If you don't analyze that, if you don't understand why theocracies are bad, you will keep going back to and repeating the same mistakes of history. In the Muslim world, there's no real curiosity of trying to understand our circumstances and why we are where we are today. Until that changes, I don't think this will keep happening. It'll become worse and worse and worse.
So, if I was to echo the charge I hear that Islam means peace, Islam means peace. Does Islam mean peace?
No, it does not.
What does Islam translate?
It literally translates to submission. So submission to God.
Meaning there will be peace if you submit.
Not exactly. It's more of a submission to God, God's will. But peace doesn't really factor into it one way or the other. It's a political movement. It's a religious movement. Peace was not being sought in the beginning, nor at any other point. It wasn't about. It was about trying to change society in a way that Muhammad viewed as being best. Some things of those were perhaps positive, some were negative, but the peace thing is, I think, relatively modern, where people are trying to make it sound better, or if, say, in the 7th century, Islam had died down, and we were looking at it back at a historical phenomena, I don't think anybody would be viewing it as a religion of peace. Muhammad conquered certain areas in Arabia, then his followers went out and subdued the Persian Empire, Egypt, Morocco, the entire North Africa. If at that point it had stopped and we were looking back at it from where nobody cared about it today, nobody would call a conquering imperialistic agenda as being peaceful. So one thing I'd like to add to that is that most Muslims may not actually necessarily identify with that. They may not be looking for war. They may not be thinking that this is what they want. They haven't examined their own traditions. Most everybody, you look at what your parents tell you, what your priest tells you, and you follow that, and that may not be going into detail. So without that critical examination, most Muslims may not even know that Muhammad was a warlord or Muhammad enslaved people. They only hear a certain view that may not be historically accurate.
So what, they are practicing the tradition of Islam without really being aware of the religion of Islam?
To a certain extent, yes.
Sounds like many Christians.
Yeah, exactly, it is. The only difference is that with Christianity, the seriousness with which people take it and the percentage of people that take it very seriously and the intermingling of state power is very, very different. It's closer to what it used to be a few hundred years ago, where most everybody believed that it was literally true, and state power and religious power were identical. In the Muslim world, that still exists.
Let's speak to the whole ex-Muslim thing. If you're an ex-Christian, well, you're going to get stones thrown at you verbally, perhaps. Yeah. But if you're an ex-Muslim, for many, the consequences are much greater. Yeah. Can we speak to that real fast?
So it depends on where you are and who you're surrounded by. So social context matters a lot. There are people who have been able to get out without any real issue. Their family accepted them. But on the other hand, there are people who have gotten death threats and who, if it have had to go into hiding, for example. There are people who have, one of our members, his family locked him up and beat him up. Another member, her family threatened to kill her and she had to go into hiding. So experiences vary depending on how conservative your family are, how seriously they take it, and which part of the world you're from. And to a certain extent, education and socioeconomic conditions factor into it as well. But if you look at the religion itself, it specifically says that apostates should be killed. It's a way of controlling. If you're a part of this community, you can never really leave.
Well, culturally, too, in some more fundamental countries, it's a matter of honor, is it not? Mother and father see a child who is an apostate, and now it speaks to the whole family.
Yeah, so if you look at historically, cultures were generally honor-based. Honor was what mattered. And most of the West, post-Enlightenment, has moved away from honor-based cultures. And most of the Muslim world hasn't done that yet.
Faisal Syed al-Mutar was talking about how that Christianity had hundreds of years to find its enlightenment. Yet here we are in the age of the weapons of mass destruction, the nuclear age, the nuclear bomb, the dirty bomb, whatever. We don't have hundreds of years for Islam to have an enlightenment. And people are more than willing to kill and die in the name of Allah. Can you speak to how critical it is now to try to quell the rising fundamental Islamic tide?
It's absolutely critical, but the thing is that it's an ideological war. You can't win it without a war of ideas, without actually pushing back against the ideas and where they're coming from.
Is anybody listening? If nothing changes with that discourse, with that dialogue, and we are speaking, presenting better ideas to kill bad ideas, are they listening at the most radical front? Will the radicals really care what we think?
The radicals may not directly care, but how are people radicalized to begin with? And there's a network effect of good ideas traveling. So a lot of the funding for radical ideas is coming from Saudi Arabia and Iran, and we need to work to eliminate those sources of funding. Also, the ideas that we're presenting, be it Richard Dawkins, be it Matt Dillahunty, be it any of the prominent atheists, they travel globally. They're on. One of the silver bullets that we have today is the internet. So anything we put out there is available globally to everybody.
So in, let's say, a very strict Islamic, an oppressed Islamic culture, they still have computers in the internet?
Mostly, yes.
And they're in there watching covertly in the shadows when nobody's looking. They're watching contrary opinions, contrary
Not necessarily. Research. It may be that, so one person may be exposed to it and they're traumatized by it. They think that these people are evil. And they may go to their more religious friend and say, help me counter this. And they may sit down trying to counter it to get a better idea of what they're doing. But usually when you start honestly exploring things, you come to the same conclusions that these are mythological figures, and it's untrue. The reason I left religion was because I spent a year studying religion because I wanted to be a better Muslim. When I studied, it was very obvious that this is mythology from the 7th century.
I was watching a documentary about the oppressive regime of North Korea and how its citizens would secretly go and they would watch, American films, and they would participate in the pop culture that was forbidden by their sort of theocratic religion, because obviously the dictators worshipped as a deity. And they ached for freedom, and the internet became their conduit. Is there a subculture of...
Yes. Also, most of the Muslim countries aren't as oppressive. So you have Saudi Arabia, you have Iran that are far more oppressive. But most of the other countries aren't rich enough or don't care enough to monitor things to that extent. So, for example, in Pakistan, they banned YouTube because of Draw Muhammad Day. But there are other video sites, there are other websites. There's too much content that's being put out there that they can't really pull the plug from the internet entirely. And they don't have the resources of China to monitor or block the internet either.
The more they try to quell it, the more people will find different avenues to get to it, right?
Yes.
Talk to me about your organization, what you do, and how an ex-Muslim can benefit from it.
So if you look at Pakistan or even in America, anywhere in the world, most people that leave Islam tend to be isolated. They don't talk to other people because they're concerned about the consequences. Islamically, for example, if you're married to somebody and you leave the religion, the marriage is automatically null and void. So spouses may not talk to each other, siblings may not talk to each other. So we're trying to change that dynamic where people no longer feel alone. You have other friends, you have people you can hang out with, talk to, share experiences with. And usually what happens is when that dynamic changes, people have courage to make changes in their life that they actually want. We have people that were in relationships with conservative Muslims but were atheists and have left those relationships or have moved out and are independent. And what happens is there's a network effect where one person does it and then their siblings, their cousins, their parents, it expands very, very rapidly once you see that it's possible to do a certain thing. One person in our group, she was able to convince her father to leave religion. Her father's an atheist now. But as a result of that, he's now talking to his cousins and his siblings in Pakistan, and he's not overtly saying I'm an atheist, but he's poking at them about issues within religion. Why do you do this thing? Why is this? This sounds wrong, and that provokes further ideas. So the benefit of a war of ideas is we have the right ideas, and they resonate with people when they're actually exposed to them. what we're trying to do is create local communities. You're actually interacting with people, meeting people. And we've had people that have moved in together, roommates, and we've had relationships develop. And there's a couple that recently got married. Both of them are Egyptian. Both families think they're devout religious, and they're both atheists. They met through us, and their family doesn't need to know.
This is like an ex-Muslim
Underground.
harmony, yeah.
So generally, dating is not the focus, but it has happened.
Look, we're talking about relationships. We're talking about community. We're talking about the things that human beings crave.
Exactly.
And that the church and religion does very, very well.
Yeah.
And when you leave a religion, you lose that sense of belonging and sort of, for lack of a better word, fellowship, to be able to spend time in conversation with people of like mind.
Exactly. So knowing that you're not alone, knowing that somebody has your back if you're in a tough situation. We've had multiple times where parents kicked out children over issues like this, and they called us. I got a call at midnight that I'm on the street, help. And we have communities in about 15, 16 cities now, and we have people that we can call and say that, hey, can you spare a bedroom? Can you spare a couch? And we've had multiple times where people were in need, and they were able to reach out and get the help they needed. And the benefit is those people themselves being a part of the community, already meeting other people, they understand that they have support, they have help, they have people that care about them.
When you see the headlines with the most radical fronts of Islam on the move, and you see this long tunnel we have to walk to get to a more rational world, do you see any light at the end of the tunnel? Is there hope?
Yes, definitely. As I said, with the internet, it's been, so 2 years ago when we started, it's been about, our anniversary is actually next month. When we launched, the average discourse within Muslim communities was that atheism is a Western phenomenon. You don't leave the truth once you're a Muslim. You're always a Muslim because it's the truth. Our existence was not acknowledged. We were called Zionist shills. Now this year, the Muslim Students Association, they have an annual convention. And at their convention, there were 2 different talks about the problem of atheism within Muslim communities and what can they do to prevent misguided youth from leaving religion.
So if they're speaking to it on all fronts, it means that it's something they're presented with on all fronts.
Exactly.
In the Christian church, they do the same thing. How do we get the young generation to come back to church? The reason those books must exist is because the young generation is leaving in droves the church. So you don't think it's a hopeless fight?
No, I am actually very hopeful. One thing I'd like to emphasize is this is a long-term ideological war. It won't be, there are no short-term fixes. It's going to take many, many years and a lot of us working together, but I do think it's inevitable.